All right, so I'm going to be going over everything I did not cover in the last video, which was the first part of the drama unit. So I'm going to be going over this module, Module 2, the drama unit. And specifically, I'm going to be going over the two folders that I didn't go over in the last video. So that's going to be General Lecture Materials and Rubric, and it's going to be Submit Evidence and Interpretation Charts assignments here, those two folders. So I'll go over this one first because it's smaller. So in this folder, we're going to find two folders, the Submit Evidence Interpretation Charts in this folder, and the Submit Essay Assignments here folder. So clicking on this one first, we see these are going to be documents that you can use. They are blank evidence interpretation charts. So you can click on one of these, print out the evidence interpretation chart, or fill it in on your computer with your own information. And then you're going to submit those here. So you're going to do one for your play, and you're going to do 4 for secondary sources. And then if you want, you can submit more for extra credit here. Then there's a Submit Essay Assignments here folder. So here we have the partial draft form, and here we have the place where you'll submit the partial draft. And here we have the final essay submission link. So clicking on the partial draft form, we can look at what we want the partial draft to look like. So this is essentially an outline that tells you everything that your partial draft should cover. Obviously, your partial draft won't look quite like this, but this is an outline to guide you to filling out a partial draft that will be comprehensive for submission. And you're going to submit that here. All right, so that's the Submit Essay and Evidence Interpretation Chart assignment here folder. Now, this folder is the next one we'll go through, the General Lecture Materials and Rubric folder, and that should finish up the drama unit. So, in this folder, we're going to see a series of lectures, so we'll go through those lectures. So first, we have an overview of the drama research paper, the directions. So we're going to write a 1,250 word research paper on one of the following plays. So you have the options: Death of a Salesman, A Dollhouse, The Glass Menagerie, Fences, A Raisin in the Sun. Focus on one of the themes in the play or write about more than one theme. Show how the literary elements in the play develop the themes. So I assume because we're reading Fences and A Raisin in the Sun for class, I assume most of you will choose those two. But if you have read, and perhaps you have read, one of these other 3 plays, or if you've seen one of these 3 plays, they are options as well. So, basic components of the paper. So the thesis should convey the theme that you'll be discussing. The topic sentence should identify subpoints from the thesis. All body paragraphs should have concluding sentences as well. Paragraphs should have transitions. The body paragraphs should quote from the play and analyze the quotations from the play in terms of their meaning. Body paragraphs should quote, summarize, and paraphrase sources about the play. These are secondary sources, right? To supplement analysis that you're making of the play. You should use present tense to discuss the action of the play. Also use present tense to integrate passages from the play and from your sources. Use past tense only to discuss events that occurred prior to the time of the play. You may also quote from sources discussing the issues you're discussing. For example, a research paper on death of a salesman could use a source on the economy during the 1940s or the American dream in general. The introduction should provide an overview of the connection between the play and life in general, a discussion of the issue and the theme, provide a brief summary of the play, and include a thesis with a theme. The thesis should be at the end of the introduction. The conclusion should have a restatement of the thesis, a summary of the essay, and a comment on the value of the play. All right, so these are some things to think about. So, the paper should have all these works cited. The play you're analyzing should be cited. Of course, right? We're writing about a play. Then we need at least 4 sources. They'll generally be literary criticism, so commentary on the play, and they can focus on psychological issues, sociological issues, or historical issues. The works cited list should be alphabetical. Don't use Shmoop, Cliff Notes, Wikipedia, SparkNotes, eNotes, Study More, LitCharts, or any of those sites. That's not a citation. Your essay should not quote cheating sites that sell essays to students either. So for this, we can look at the CER body paragraph approach. So we start with a claim, right? Then we invoke some evidence, and then we give our reasoning. And we can do that on repeat, right? So you could make a body paragraph that might look like this. So as a general rule of thumb, you might have 2 pieces of evidence from the primary text and 1 piece from a secondary source. The primary text being the play. The secondary sources discuss the play, the author, the historical context, or overall literary theory. So next, ACE's paragraph. So here we have an example ACE's paragraph. So what is ACE's again? We answer the question, cite evidence, elaborate, and summarize. So here we have an example paragraph of this. So we can read that paragraph from here down. So basically this first part is going to what? It's going to answer a question. And then it's going to give us a quote. Evidence, right? So here's a quote with evidence. After that, what does it do? It elaborates on the quote. So it keeps elaborating. And then finally, we want to summarize. So reading this paragraph can give you a gist of what you might try to write yourself. This is a model paragraph, right? So one thing you could do is you could write with this paragraph on one screen and your own work on the other screen and see if you're hitting all of the major beats, right? All of these major ACEs beats. All right. The next thing. So, coherence devices. What is that? So a coherence device is just a part of your writing that links together ideas so that the reader understands your points. It guides the reader through the paper. So we want lots of things in our writing to be coherent, right? That's clear, concise, for the reader to understand. So a thesis, that's an initial coherence device. We want them to know what the main point is. And we want topic sentences to support the thesis. We want concluding sentences to wrap up the paragraphs. We also want transitions between paragraphs so that it feels like it flows. So these are some baby transitions, meaning they're short transitions that you could use. These are examples of how you might make a sophisticated transition. So you could summarize a point from a previous paragraph, which leads to a new paragraph, or summarize a previous example and move to the next. You could also have scheme statements, so that would be overviews of examples, roadmaps, summaries. It would establish for your reader what examples will be. So here's an example of that. 3 characters comments support the idea. So after this, we can assume we're going to be introduced to those 3 different characters' comments. And then concluding sentences. So we want to wrap the paragraph up by concluding and restating ideas so that the reader gets reminded of what this paragraph was about and can move on to the next thing. So here's an essay sample. So this essay is about The Great Gatsby. And in this is an interesting sample. You can move over all of these words that are highlighted to see what they are. So all of these are going to be coherence devices, right? So we have context. We start with context. Baby transition. Those are small transitions between sentences, right? Between ideas. Then we have the thesis. Money cannot buy love, friends, or happiness. People are not always what they seem, and dreams may sometimes be unattainable. That's the thesis, so they're going to support that. So there's going to be 3 paragraphs. The first one, the topic sentence, this first sentence cues us back to the thesis. And it gives us what's going to come. 3 examples from the movie, right? So how are we going to support this thesis? We're going to look at 3 examples from the movie. And then notice that down here, we refer back. These 3 examples, or these examples portray that no matter how much money people have, obtaining what they truly desire is difficult. So notice that this concluding sentence, it ties the topic back to the thesis. The 3 examples support the thesis. And this one, we're going to transition into the next sentence, and we're going to discuss the second topic that was in the thesis. People are not always what they seem. So that's going to be the topic here, right? So we're going to talk about Tom, Daisy, and Gadsby and how they appear to be a different person. And then down here, we once again have Tom, Daisy's, Gadsby's behaviors show how deceitful people can be and how people's images can be far from the reality of their true characters. This ties it back to the thesis. It also ties it up to this this topic sentence at the beginning, because we're talking about these characters. And then here we have a paragraph that you could test yourself on. You could identify topics, sentences, concluding sentences, and transitions. So, how might we choose passages from secondary sources? So, we want to do these things. We want to provide insight to the literary work, use unique wording. We want to quote. We don't want to just quote the literary work from the secondary source. And we want to provide insight, right? We don't want to quote something that doesn't provide insight. And we also don't want to quote plot details. We want the details to support our thesis. which is about the themes, and it's about those insights about the themes that we gather from the text. That's what we want to quote to support, right? So here's some strong passages to quote. Nora is an object of beauty, lacking substance. So maybe that reflects back to the themes, beauty, lacking substance. Nora has led an insignificant existence. Maybe the theme of futility, vanity. Each major character in the play struggles with personal desires that clash with his or her duties. So this directly addresses the characters and the theme of the play, desires versus duties. She retreats into her world of glass animals unable to meet the responsibilities of adulthood. Again, this provides the setting and then connects that to the theme, responsibilities of adulthood. Here's some passages that don't need to be quoted. Nora Helmer is the central character in the play. Okay, that should be obvious. Nora's husband Torvald has been promoted to bank manager. That's a plot detail. Nora previously entered into a loan agreement in secret with Niels Korsgaard. That's just part of the plot. We don't need to quote that. Her single date is an even larger disaster as her intended beau is already betrothed. Okay. So, here's some examples. These are from Fences. So, what's in the plot versus how you analyze that. So, on the one side, we have Troy not building the fence. That's part of the plot we can talk about. We have Rose wants the fence, part of the plot we can talk about. Troy refuses to let Corey play football, part of the plot. And we can analyze each one of these. So, what do these symbolize? Do they reflect his stubbornness? They reflect his being tired from manual labor. What does this symbolize? It symbolizes her desire to have boundaries. Symbolizes desire to have Troy live up to his responsibilities. What does this tell us about the play? Well, we can analyze this as it reflects Troy's mistrust of American society, reflects his belief that no black person will ever be treated fairly, reflects his desire to be in control of life. So these are some ways down here of how you can talk about the plot and what it means to the greater themes, right? All right. So let's go over this last one. So here's some possible research topics. These are for A Doll's House. The play is full of references to dolls, puppets, and playthings. Trace these references through the play while analyzing the ideas about gender and societal roles. What theme becomes apparent? So you could do these for any of the plays, right? You could look at what are the major symbols in the play. When Nora submits to Torvald, telling him, "Whatever you do is always right," he replies, "Now my little lark's talking like a human being." But later Nora says, "Before all else, I'm a human being." Compare and contrast Torvald's and Nora's definitions of a human being. How do the similarities and differences in definitions relate to the theme? Okay, so you could look for quotes like this in the play and compare contrast quotes and question how those give different senses of an overarching theme. In this case, the theme of what it means to be a human being. So there's a lot more of these. So you could write about vivid dramatic devices. Those are the devices of a play, right, of a drama. You could look at a character in particular and ask questions about the character. You could also look at certain themes that people write about. So a lot of people write about feminism or themes of asserting the self, right? Being self-governed, being self-motivated. So you could write about themes like that. You could also write about motifs. That's just recurring things in the play. Sickness and fever. If something occurs a lot in the play, you could refer to that. You could look at a minor character. Maybe there's a minor character that shows up and doesn't have a very strong role, but has a notable presence in the play. Why is that minor character there? You could take a quote that you thought was especially interesting. This is a quote about realism. So you could reflect on the quote and ask, is it a realistic play? How does the realism of the play relate to the theme? You could ask how characters compare and contrast. So how are these characters foils? And you could also do the same thing with relationships. How do relationships in the play compare and contrast? So here's a lot more that you could work with. So obviously these are for the dollhouse, but you could conceivably try to apply any one of these themes to any given play and see if the question might work, because these are meant to be broad themes, right? So here's the first one. Viewing men's behaviors from previous centuries as misogynistic does not make sense because men were not being misogynistic. They were acting as products of their society. So you can ask that of one of the plays we read. You could change out men and exchange that for something else too. You could exchange it for, in the case of A Raisin in the Sun, you could exchange it for something like the character of the white neighbors. Or you could leave it as men even and ask whether the male characters act differently from the female characters. Number two, most people would do anything if they had to help their families survive. So this one could apply to our plays, right? We could ask whether in Fences the characters do this, or whether in A Raisin in the Sun the characters do this. So you can do that with any play, and you can do that with almost any question, right? Try to apply the question to the play and see if you can get some interesting result, especially if you're having trouble figuring out a research topic on your own, right? Excuse me. All right. And this next one is the library guide on finding literary criticism. So if you click on this link, you'll be sent here. And it is just a review of literary criticism. So you have a definition here. Literary criticism is an in-depth analysis of a literary work, a novel, a play, a poem, or a short story. Preferred sources include articles published in scholarly journals, reference books, and the work itself. So we have a lot of criticism here. We have Bloom's literature. So there's a famous literary critic, Harold Bloom. So this contains tons of his work. Then we have literary criticism from Gale. We have Literary Reference Center, and we have Salem Literature. So these are going to be great references to use when you're doing research, because they are going to have information about the particular play that you're interested in looking at. So that's the library guide on finding literary criticism. So let's look at this analytical verb chart. So we already discussed this one. These are just verbs you might use when analyzing, right? What does the quote display? What does the quote show? What does it illustrate? When you're discussing literature, you want to use those analytical verbs because you're trying to use devices from the work, from the primary source, to show something about the theme, right? And the rubric we're using is essay rubric B for essays involving research. So as I covered before, this has all of the main elements as essay rubric A for essays without research. But in addition, so it has content, organization, style, grammar. But in addition, it has MLA format, documentation lists, documentation in-text citation, and sources. So those are the things you'll be graded on, and the percentages of your grade those will be. And let's open these. And let's go to this video. Let's open these and go to this video. All right, so integrating quotations from the primary text into literary analysis. So we want to first use a signal phrase to integrate literary quotations. A signal phrase, remember, is something like this. This is a baby signal phrase. The author writes, quote. You say something like, the author writes, and then comma, and then you put the quote that you want to quote, right? Right, follow the phrase with a comma. You can also use a complete sentence. So here's a complete sentence signal. Character name is blank when he or she blank. So you can use, and then at the end, notice there is a colon. So John says something, and then you have the colon, and that introduces the quotation mark. So you're going to quote right after the colon. Follow the complete sentence signal phrase with a colon. In general, the complete sentence introduction is better. It provides a context for the passage you're quoting. So if you're going to quote something that a character said in the play, you might give a full sentence introducing that quote, what the character was doing, what they were talking about, who they were talking to when they said this. So use that sophisticated signal phrase more often than not. We also want to use a signal phrase with a strong verb. So we also want to use full sentence to integrate the quotation, like we just said. So we're going to look at some examples of those. So here's a full sentence to integrate the quotation. Mama describes her frequent dream, colon. And then here's the quotation mark that follows. So this is a full sentence, but then the fact that it follows with a colon introduces the dream, right? And this is going to be the dream. A quote describing the dream. You can also use a phrase. So Mama and Maggie have prepared their home for Dee's visit. Mama says, and then the quote. So in this case, it's Mama says, comma, and a quote. Then you want to follow the quotations with your analysis, right? And your analysis, you'll use these kinds of words. Those are the analytic words, right? So this is what you follow the quote with. In the first case, case A, Mama's dream about Dee's visit reveals, there's that word, right? There's that analytic verb. that reveals the tension that exists between D and her. That tension only becomes more pronounced when D arrives. And then the next one, this description of the yard conveys the humility and simplicity of Mama and Maggie's lifestyle, while also showing that they value what they do have. Okay. So, this last link is just your link to this Purdue OWL MLA documentation videos. So here you could look at what Purdue OWL says in these videos about MLA style and MLA documentation. That should help you follow MLA formatting when you're writing your drama essay. All right. And we'll go through these lessons as well. Drama thesis statements. So, you want your drama thesis statement to convey the general theme, identify literary elements, only focus on individual characters when mentioning a theme, and loosely convey your essay's structure. That's what you want your thesis statement to do. So it's doing a lot of things, right? The thesis statement's really important. And here are some good examples of thesis statements that you could use. So notice that we have the thesis statement, and then we have after it what the thesis statement does. So we'll go through this first one. Or let's go through one that's going to be about one of the plays that we've read. Oh, there are none about the plays we've read. Let's do this one about let's do one of these then. Throughout the difficulties in the play, some of the characters display the difficulty of accepting responsibility and the possibility of true escape. So this one identifies two issues, accepting responsibility and the impossibility of true escape. It identifies characterization as the literary element, so the characters display. And then it has structure. So discussion of the themes relative to relevant characters. So we know we're going to be discussing themes and discussing characters. So that's going to be the structure of this essay. Here's the next one. The story tells how oppressive parenting can have a negative impact and how one could cope with it, and even uses symbols to better describe their issues. So this identifies two themes. The two themes are oppressive parenting can have a negative impact and how one could cope with it. It identifies symbolism as the literary element and characterization. So the symbolism and oppressive parenting, the parenting would be a characterization, and the structure. We assume that the characters and symbols relate to the theme. That's how it'll be structured, around characters and symbols. Now, what I would recommend, though, is that what's missing from these two thesis statements, we don't even know what stories these are about. That's okay because they're generic and we can use them. But in your thesis statement, we probably should know which story you're referring to. Pretty forward. That should be pretty forward in the essay, right? All right. There's also examples of thesis statements that need work here. Those are thesis statements that might be missing something. So if it focuses on a single character or does not convey a theme, those might be missing something. You might want to broaden it to more than one character, and you definitely need to have a theme. That's going to be the heart of your thesis statement. Does not convey a theme, another problematic one. Focuses on a single character, does not convey a theme. Noticing a pattern here, right? We don't want our thesis statement to look like that. All right. So this is more of the same. Oh, actually, this is the exact same document, just structured differently. Okay, never mind. Fences. All right, so this is just a copy of the screenplay Fences. So this is for anyone who wants to use this as a reference. If you're going to be writing about fences, you might refer to this as your primary source, right? And hints on writing literary analysis. I think this is the last thing we're going to be going over. Yeah, it's the last thing. So, last but not least, so one of the easiest ways to bring up a grade on a literary analysis essay, or frankly any essay, is to eliminate second-person pronouns. You, your, yours. What you can do is do a search for the word you and replace it with word usage. Replace that word usage with a noun. Okay, so no yous, right? A difficult but significant improvement is possible when providing a strong theme. So we always want to focus on the theme, right? Like I said, that's the heart of the essay. If you read your story, that's one of the things you should always be thinking about. What's the theme? What's the theme here for me? What could I write about that makes it a universal message for people? What's the moral of this story? A challenging but also helpful improvement is editing all the errors. So try to avoid your grammar errors. So, my main recommendation there is to read your essay again after you've written it, and maybe even to read it out loud, because reading it out loud can help you hear the errors. Add quotations from the primary text. So if you don't have a lot of quotations from the primary text, you might look for ones. Any good quotation that you think supports your message, supports your thesis statement. And use literary terms as appropriate. So terms like character, setting, what else? Plot, symbol, tone, mood, metaphor, those kinds of literary terms, right? All right. You also want to add signal phrases that provide plot context for the quotations. So those are those full sentence signal phrases that could go before the quotation to give the quotation contextual information for the reader. And also, if it states the theme as a clause rather than a noun, plus a prepositional phrase, that's better. The clause has a subject and a verb. So it's better to say innocence is fragile. It's better to say that than to say the fragility of innocence. And that's it. So that's it for the drama unit. So if you have any questions about that, just send me an email and I can respond to the class so that you guys can write great essays for this week. All right. See you next week.